I'm Dekota McGee. I'm this year's Louisiana FFA State Secretary. And on this episode of Digging Deeper, we'll be talking to Mr. Avery Davidson, who is the Communications Director for Louisiana Farm Bureau and also a co-host for This Week in Louisiana Agriculture, also known as TWILA. So what the Speak Ag Ambassadorship is, it was me selected with 12 other state officers. And so we got to go to Newark, and we had speakers come and just tell us what we should do to be better advocates and how to develop messages and to make sure that our messages can be heard and that others really want to engage with us. And we got to do a workshop at National Convention that we spoke to members and we just gave them tips on how to be better advocates. And so today I would like to start us off with asking you how you got into TV broadcasting.
Well, first, I want to say that it's important that you advocate for agriculture, because if you don't tell the story, somebody else will, and you may not like the way in which they tell that story. So my background is actually not an ag background. I grew up in New Iberia. My father worked in the oil field all of his life. My mother was a stay-at-home mom. She had been a hairdresser before that. And so my background is actually television news and broadcasting. I started out working radio in 1992, did that for about 3 years. And in 1995, I went to work for KATC TV3 in Lafayette, Louisiana, did that until 1999. And then in March of 99 is when I went to WAFB in Baton Rouge to be a producer and reporter and videographer there. The only job I think I did not do there was graphics at one point or another. But then when I left, I was weekend anchor, and I went to work for the Louisiana Farm Bureau Federation, which is where my journey with ag communications really began. I mean, I had done some reporting on agriculture whenever I worked in regular TV news, but it was my friendship with Michael Dana, who was the previous director of public relations at the Louisiana Farm Bureau Federation, which led to me going to work in agriculture.
Yes, sir. So what are some of your roles in TWILA and the Louisiana Farm Bureau?
So I am now the communications director for the Louisiana Farm Bureau Federation. So I'm a part of a department of 6 people. We handle all of the social media accounts, all the web accounts, internal and external communications for the Louisiana Farm Bureau Federation. And part of that is TWILA, This Week in Louisiana Agriculture, the TV show produced by the Louisiana Farm Bureau Federation. It's been on the air since 1981, started by Reginald Wallace. And he had a great vision in seeing that we needed agricultural storytelling and information to get to farmers and ranchers. Television was a great medium to do that. Now with the internet, farmers and ranchers are getting all the prices and commodity updates on their phones. So we've gotten the show to be much more consumer focused, to bridge that gap between farmers and consumers. And we say at the beginning of every show, This Week in Louisiana Agriculture is the only TV show bringing Louisiana farmers and consumers together every week. That's our mission. That's what we do every single week that we put a show out there, is bring farmers and consumers together, because one needs the other. And no matter what, I know sometime in your life you might need a doctor, especially right now. You might need a lawyer at some point in your life, but 3 times a day you need a farmer. So that's really the message that we try to get across there.
How do you choose which stories and the messages that you broadcast on your show?
So stories typically come about the same way that they would come about back when I was working in regular TV news. You make contacts, you talk to people, you read about what's happening nationally, and sometimes you get tips from folks. Folks just call you up and say, hey, I know this person who just started raising honeybees, and they're doing it a little bit different. So you want to see what they're doing. And so, you'll find out about that story. And then you always try to relate it back to something that the consumer can relate to. A lot of times it's going to be food because, agriculture is what feeds us. But sometimes you relate it to other things. Like I've done a story about a luthier, which is a person who makes guitars. Well, they are using wood. Wood is an agricultural product. The house that you live in, the importance of housing and how that impacts the timber industry, because the timber industry is Louisiana's top agricultural industry. And a lot of people don't even realize that it's such a big player, more than $1 billion a year into the state. So that's kind of how we pick. Now, as far as the messaging goes, a lot of times we also look at what's going on policy-wise concerning farmers and ranchers, and making sure that people understand some of the issues they face. Labor is one of the constant issues that we try to touch on here and there because, example, when August comes around, sugarcane farmers are going to need people to plant their crops. Well, that's not a job that any American is going to want to do. Bobby Morris over there in West Baton Rouge Parish has been advertising for more than 20 years. He's had that, he has a position open. Come and work on my farm to plant sugarcane. No one has ever responded to that ad in 20 years. So he needs H-2A labor. He needs immigrant labor to come in to help out and plant his sugarcane, or else he's got no one willing to do it. So those are the kinds of stories and issues that we'll tackle. Right now, obviously, we're focused very heavily on our crawfish farmers. And that's because with the COVID-19 crisis, they're losing their season. And it's not like you can just kind of put crawfish to the side and sell it whenever everybody is able to get back together and start having crawfish boils. No, it's a season. It ends at a certain point. They're going to go back in the ground. And you've also got to plant rice if you're planting rice behind your crawfish. So we're working very hard to make sure that, one, consumers know that crawfish are still available.
Yes, sir.
Farmers will bring them to you. Go out and eat as much as you can. Went and picked up 2 pounds of crawfish tails from my mom just the other day. And then the other is we're working behind the scenes with the Louisiana Farm Bureau to try and find some way to get government help for these crawfish farmers under some of the livestock provisions. So there we have Brian Bro and Andy Brown and Ron Harrell all working feverishly in our commodity department trying to make that happen. And then we as the communications department will get that message out to our farmers, ranchers, and consumers.
Yes, sir. So besides TWILA, what are some other ways that Louisiana Farm Bureau promotes agriculture?
We also have a daily e-newsletter, the Daily Voice, which goes out every morning at 5 a.m. If it goes out any later than that, I get a phone call from someone saying, "Hey, where's the Daily Voice?" Actually, they don't wake me up. They're nice enough to just email. But we have that. We also have the Voice of Louisiana Agriculture Radio Network that we do in conjunction with Louisiana Radio Network. Don Molino and myself do those radio reports. We have all of our social media outlets. So we have the Voice of Louisiana Agriculture social media on Facebook and Twitter. We have This Week in Louisiana Agriculture, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We have the Louisiana Farm Bureau Federation Facebook page, Twitter, and Instagram. We also post all of our videos on YouTube. We produce videos specifically for YouTube in some cases. Let's see. We also have the website for the Louisiana Farm Bureau Federation and This Week in Louisiana Agriculture. Overall, we have more than 20 affiliates for This Week in Louisiana Agriculture, the TV show. So we have a lot of ways in which we communicate. The people on our staff are myself, Carl Wiggers, who is the co-producer of This Week in Louisiana Agriculture, Neil Melanson, who's the Assistant Director of Communications and co-producer of This Week in Louisiana Agriculture, Kristen Oaks White, who heads up all of our social media and also co-host of TWILA, and Monica Velasquez, who's our graphic designer. And we also have a contract graphic designer, Valerie Foman, who helps out with the Ag in the Classroom website. So that's another thing that Louisiana Farm Bureau does, and that's really important right now because parents are having to homeschool. I've got my 7-year-old and 4-year-old here who we're having to find things for them to do and learn. Well, here's the Ag in the Classroom curriculum set for each of their age groups, and it's all right there readily available at aatcla.org.
What types of content do you think that the public engages the best with when you're talking about agriculture and trying to spread the messages?
So as of late, crawfish has been really, we've gotten a lot of interaction on our crawfish posts. But as a general rule, it's going to be something something relatable. And again, I go back to food being so relatable because 3 times a day we're going to want to eat. And so if you can connect that farmer to the food, when you can connect Marty Woldridge up in Caddo Parish, who has Woldridge meat, to the restaurant that sells the hamburgers made with the beef he's raised, those seem to be the ones that get the most engagement. And uh, when it comes to any kind of storytelling, the most important thing you can have are characters. And so you've got to make sure your characters in that story are relatable and people can relate to these characters. People will forget about issues. They'll forget some details, but they're going to remember people. And so as long as you have a person in that story they can relate to, they can understand, who they can sympathize and empathize with, that's what makes the difference.
Yes, sir. So when our FFA members are looking for agriculture information, how do you advise them to know what to believe and what not to believe?
That's tough. And the reason why I say that's tough is because the internet has clouded so many things. I'm a firm believer in looking at as many sources as possible and looking at reputable sources. So I'm going to turn to the American Farm Bureau Federation for information. I'm going to turn to the LSU Ag Center. I'm going to turn to the Southern Ag Center. I'm going to turn to the Louisiana Farm Bureau Federation for information there. A lot of blogs, I'm not going to put a whole lot of credence in for the most part. And the sad thing is, even if it's someone who may have a very strong, deep ag background, they may still also have an agenda. And so always think about what that might be. And so that's not to say that any of the bloggers or influencers out there are not doing a good job, because if you should tell your own story of agriculture, but know that just because someone may say that they've been farming for 20 years, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're farming like everyone else and don't have something of their own that they're considering. Find those reputable sources um, that are going. Delta Farm Press, folks who've been covering agriculture for decades and decades. And I guess that's also the old journalist in me, always second guessing blogs. I always second guess sources everywhere I look, even like with the national news. I'll be like, okay, they sourced that from there, but okay, they got a balanced report here, but they didn't get a balanced report here. They just talked to this person. So you've just got to be very, I guess, skeptical. And I've always been that way because I've always found multiple sources for news and information.
So, final question. What do you think our FFA members need to know the most about spreading their story and their message about agriculture?
The most important thing I think FFA members need to know is that if you don't tell your story, someone else will, and you may not like the way in which they tell it. So make the effort to become a credible source. Make the effort to make sure that you always present factual information to the best of your ability, that you work with some of those credible sources I mentioned earlier, the Southern Ag Center, the LSU Ag Center, the Department of Agriculture and Forestry. These are all people who have been working very hard at this, have made a name for themselves and built it on credibility. I'm a firm believer all anyone ever has is their credibility. So the moment you allow some source that may not be credible to influence what you're doing, what you believe, you've got to really look hard at that and make sure that you're always going back to credible sources. I I used to always be a firm believer that if you don't have at least 3 sources on something, you can't really report it. And I'm talking about primary sources going back to my old reporting days. So I still sort of carry that over. But I have a lot of really good experts around me, and Kyle McCann, who is the assistant to the president for the Louisiana Farm Bureau, Commissioner Mike Strain. I've got a lot of people who I can really turn to who are those credible sources, who have done the research, who have lived, the agricultural life, and allow me to have that good source to turn to.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you so much for allowing me to interview today. And I really enjoy talking to you, and I know our viewers will too.
Well, Dekota, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much. And if ever I can help, give me a call.